All righty, everybody. Good afternoon. We got the recording in process now. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope everyone is doing well across the nation. Welcome, the long-awaited and overly excited crossover webinar between our two professional organizations, CABMA and NAAC. We are really excited about the group that we have here today. I'm Kyle Ray. I serve as the Associate AD of Business Ops at the University of Virginia. And welcome. So thank you so much for being here today and this topic that we'll be talking about today of living in the gray. So a real opportunity for two great offices, at least in my personal opinion, business office and compliance office, to talk about some of the best practices, how we deal with being good financial stewards, but also following legislation that comes down from the NCAA and making sure that we do things the right way. So I'm going to kick it over. We've got a great panel here today, and we've got an excellent moderator, Matt Banker, who's coming from MB Sports Consulting. Matt is a vet. He's got over 20 plus years in college athletics and higher education, who's been at the NCAA National Office, the NCAA Eligibility Center, Division I Conference Office, and at Power Five Division I institutions. So Matt is going to be a great leader through this, and he will take it from here as the moderator. So Matt, I'll kick it over to you now.
Great. Thanks, Kyle, and good afternoon or good morning, wherever you might be sitting. It's great to be with everyone today. I'm really pleased to have a small role in today's conversation. And the sort of first order of business, and as it's entitled, Living in the Gray, we're going to talk about a lot of the dynamics I think a lot of folks on campus navigate every single day. And our panel, I think, is really well positioned to maybe share some perspectives and best practices that can be helpful. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panel as a collective, and then we'll jump into some of the topics and questions and scenarios. I'm curious as well about what they do and how they approach it together. So from University of Louisville, we have Dan Morrissey, who's the Assistant Athletic Director for Compliance. Also from University of Louisville, we have Heidi Hubner, who works in the Athletics Business Office, also Assistant Athletic Director for Business and Strategy. And also our friends from University of Memphis, we have Haley Pruitt, who is Senior Associate Athletic Director and CFO at Memphis. And last but not least, Harley King, Associate Athletic Director of Compliance at University of Memphis. So Harley, Haley, Heidi, and Dan, thanks for being here today. Also, a little bit of kind of programming before we jump into the substance on two fronts. One is we'll definitely save some time toward the end for a little bit of open Q&A, and I know our event moderators will be keeping an eye on anything submitted in the chat and so forth in terms of questions that the top of mind for so many is that the House case. We will probably talk about things more adjacent to that, but both CABMA and NAAC will have a lot of programming and multiple sessions at convention here in June on that specifically. So we're not going to do deep diving on House in particular, but there's still a lot to cover in college athletics for sure. So with that said, I want to start, and we'll maybe start with our friends at Memphis and then go to Dan and Heidi at Louisville. But to Harley and Haley, some of the headlines, even here in the last few days, talk about deregulation. We're going to look at sweeping changes to the NCAA rule book, getting rid of a lot of rules and so forth. And with that comes the dynamic of not having the answer necessarily in the NCAA rule book, but probably more localized decision making, whatever that amounts to. So that's not new. Of course, it's a headline this week, but we've been kind of going through that process for quite some time now in college athletics. And starting with you at Memphis, Harley and Haley, just thoughts around how you navigate things when it becomes a Memphis decision and not necessarily a national issue or law that's going to give you the answer.
Yeah, I can start with that. Of course, as you alluded to, items, that we look at have transitioned really from when we look at expenses and the environment where compliance was reviewing scenarios, attempting to achieve permissibility, whether it's legislatively or interpretively, or even submitting waivers to deliver decisions on scenarios. Now that's kind of flipped. So we're in an era where it's more student athlete welfare friendly. deregulation and revised legislation and adopted legislation have all made scenarios that are more permissive. So now it's kind of the business office area that kind of makes decisions and determinations on approval from a funding standpoint. So, essentially the business office takes on more decisions as they consider resources, and then that defines whether we can do something versus in-state legislation. So the compliance office typically has a tagline now that, yes, this is permissible. However, you're going to have to check with the business office for funding approval before moving forward. And, there are a number of items that can fall into. And I think, Haley can maybe elaborate as to on her side after we give those directives to coaches that, yeah, you can do this per the rule book, but you may need to check with the business office.
Yeah, I'll add to it. So, of course, there's a lot with more permissibility comes more expense. So, we're looking at things all the time on what makes the most sense for us. But, to go into a few examples, which even before, the big headlines this week of a lot of deregulation coming, Harley and I had talked about some of the things that we frequently see between our two offices. And, an example of, over the last several years, which this, goes back a ways now, but, there's been a lot of deregulation around feeding our student athletes and meals, and that's a huge piece of what all of our teams want to do now, and looking at how we plan better on budgets for the teams that make that a different level priority than the ones that maybe are a little smaller and don't have quite as much of a food budget. So we have conversations frequently during the year, tracking where teams are, and then also going into the budget process on if this is something that's going to be a priority for your team, which we understand it is in almost every case. What do we need to do to make sure that there's other areas where we're cutting back or finding ways to be smarter with the funds so that more money can go towards your meals or et cetera, whatever the topic is in that instance. We talked about examples of even, our staffing models and how there's been changes in what's allowable for the number of coaches and how that number grows, and trying to make a plan in several years out, and how do we sit down with our programs and say, you need to be putting a staffing plan together on your end too, not that we can fulfill every request, but that knowing that there's a lot more flexibility in the types of staff members they can have, and what that would cost us. We need to see a staffing plan further in advance to be able to plan better on the financial end of what types of positions can we accommodate in the short term and which ones we may have to phase in or not do at all. So right now we're putting a lot more of that discussion back on our head coaches and their staffs, to say, you've got to figure out what the priority on your end is and be able to communicate that to us in a way that we can understand what that means for your program. And so then we can better plan for you, a year at a time, on how to make some of those things happen. So it definitely has put a lot of additional conversation on the business office, where sometimes we used to just be able to say, you can't do it, compliance says, and it wasn't our fault. Now maybe some of that is, on us to be the ones to say no. But I think that just encourages us to have more frequent conversations with some of those sports to understand their priority levels.
Yeah, I'll just expand a little bit further. And what falls on us as well in compliance is just to stay on top of all these rules and deregulations and newly permitted benefits that are now becoming permissible. Just educate the business office and other coaches and staff just to make sure everyone's understood and aware of what has evolved and where we're at now. And we get different requests for academic success items or official visit expenses, and the number of those that are changing now, and the transportation you can provide for family with that, and even expanding to the student athlete benefits for health, safety, and well-being in emergency situations. And just knowing all these things being permissive, but they come with a cost, and can we do that institutionally? That's the discussion we have on the front end together to make sure we're giving the same message to the coaches.
Dan and Heidi, I want to go to you for sure. Thoughts on just those changing dynamics with deregulation, and anything you can add to what Haley and Harley already shared?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very similar here. From the business office standpoint, kind of echoing some of the things Haley's talking about with those rule changes. Even in the past, a lot of times it seems to come at the end of the year when budgets are made. So, but a lot of time we can know they're coming, or we're talking with our compliance office to know, hey, what's down the pipeline. So I think it's a balance of being proactive, but also reactive when you need to be. From our standpoint, I'm really big on our analysis, always being able to be, consistent, effective, and efficient. So if we need to make, quick decisions, we can do that with the data we have, and being able to just analyze from every viewpoint, how we're going to pivot and how, as Haley was saying, what we're prioritizing and how we're going to balance just everything. But again, I think communication is just really the biggest piece with us in the compliance office.
Yeah, echoing a lot of what everyone else said, the communication is big. Whether it's kind of knowing what's coming in the pipeline from a proposal standpoint, what concepts may be out there, being able to have those discussions with the business office staff to say, hey, this could be coming, just so you're aware here, it's deregulation. There might be financial impacts, things of that nature. Giving them as much lead time for some of these rules changes as we possibly can. In the kind of real-time decisions, as Harley mentioned, we're no longer the no office, particularly in some instances. So when we do get a question, it's telling the coaching staff, yeah, you can, but you need to check with the business office. But then it's taking it a step further and giving the business office a heads up of like, hey, had this conversation with this coaching staff. This is what they're looking to do. This is what they've explained to me. Want you to be aware of it. We've told them to come ask you. And then also with that is just trying to troubleshoot things with the coaches. You talk about meals. There's a lot of different avenues where meals can be provided, whether it's per diem or ordering in food or whatever it may be, and letting the coaches know that, hey, there are options to accomplish what your goal is that maybe can help you from a budgetary standpoint, so that when you do go to the business office to ask, hey, I want to do this, you're prepared for what they may come back at you with and say, yes, we see what you want to do. Would you think about, instead of per diem, maybe doing it this way, a catered meal or something like that, that can help on the budget side?
All good thoughts there. I want to follow up collectively, and any of you, you don't all have to jump in. Any of you with something that comes to mind with your role that you kind of have to coach the coaches up these days with kind of a new approach to how they manage their sport program, whether you wear the compliance hat, business office, sport admin, all the above in some ways. What is one thing, you don't have to name your coach or your sport program, but maybe identify something a head coach has done more recently that you go, if other head coaches would do this would be helpful not only to them, but the whole enterprise and where we're going, almost like a best practice. Has anything stood out to you from any of your head coaches in terms of how they're approaching all these uncertainties that's been effective?
I can speak on that. From a budget standpoint, we really have a good group of coaches here, not only head coaches, but all of our assistant coaches, support staff. I think they understand, really where things are headed. And with that, if there's certain things in our budget, we talk about travel a lot and having that be, it can be variable each year. So if one team needs more or less each year, them understanding, if they all of a sudden pivoted and needed to take a bus trip instead of a plane, commercial trip or a charter trip, and there's savings there now. Our coaches have been really good about communicating that and being like, hey, we're actually going to have savings from our travel standpoint, even though that's a pretty, variable amount each year. So I would say they're really good at understanding, if we give a little bit, we might get a little bit as well when we need that for those really high priority items.
Yeah, I have to say one example that's pretty much very similar to what Heidi was saying is I had a coach that has done a good job this year of making it very clear that with all the changes in recruiting and how they are to recruit in that specific sport, that the trying to find money for their recruiting line was the major priority for this sport. And we had an example kind of exactly where Heidi was saying that there was some savings in travel due to a couple changes in trips over the course of their season, and was, approached by that coach that this is definitely where I would like to move this savings to recruiting now. And I want to make a plan to make sure that money can, as much money as possible, can stay there in that recruiting line with, the changes that they're seeing in their sport and portal and how often they're traveling recruit wise right now. So it was a good reactionary conversation on the savings that was in the travel for this year, but also a proactive where my office fully understands that anything that we can do for that sport right now is going to be increasing in that recruiting line. And that was very clear that in budget meetings with them, that's the plan first and second priority there. And not every sport is quite as clear on, they have some have 6 priorities that are all number one somehow, but that sport really did help us kind of set a roadmap for if we do know some things like that, that it's easy for us to say every time we identify an area where maybe we can be more efficient, that the savings that we can make there should help with their recruiting.
I imagine this is more of an observation that athletics business office staff have either had to change their locks or change their phone numbers with all these rule changes, because you've become the most popular person and have been put in a spot to kind of have to navigate not tougher, but just more complex decision making for sure. One thing that's a common thread for all of you in the units you represent certainly are workflows and even technology, and just maybe speaking to a couple of respects. One is any technology, and we're not here to endorse any particular company or product, but just things that you have found to be helpful, like, hey, in this area, there are more solutions to do X or Y, and that's helped our offices collectively. And then kind of parallel to that, and feel free to jump in on either side of this question, is how you collaborate and how you flag things, or just how that dynamic works when something goes through a workflow from a sport program, coaches, whether it's from student athletes back to your offices. So again, this one's, maybe I'll start with the Memphis folks here, Harley and Haley, and then we'll go to Dan and Heidi.
Yeah, I mean, we utilize Teamworks and CNR on our campus, and in our communication with the business office in this area with the workflows, we have some popular ones that they're involved in with us. Most commonly used with the business office are, camp and clinic approvals, official visits, and per diem request. And the per diem request, I would say, is our most recently one that we've actually worked on together to establish, as some items change with meals that we've already mentioned before. And business office individual that was involved in per diem was looking in a way to tighten up the area of distributing the funds and the process of approval, who to receive per diem on trips or break periods or those types of areas. And we work together to come and establish a workflow that resolves some of those concerns and put some accountability on the coaches to submit those for approval and who is getting what amounts. And that's worked out pretty well for us there. So, but in addition to workflows, we also just communicate regularly on areas that we both need to be looped in on, such as staffing updates that, Haley mentioned earlier, but we also are provided those as they occur. So we're up to date on who should be on staff declarations, who's serving in what roles, who should be educated on what their do's and don'ts are, as well as providing the business office with the active list of who can be an off-campus recruiter and who can receive expenses for recruiting activities and those types of things. So we keep looped in together on our communication and also use the workflows in CNR to do that.
Yeah, I'll add on quickly. He mentioned most of the ones that are the best examples of how we use that. But yes, our office is in CNR frequently to see those workflows. But the per diem request one he mentioned was a good project for one of my team members that I think we use a reloadable card program, and that part of it's very smooth, but getting the coaches to understand the request time to the time that the money was being loaded on the cards, as changes were made, so and so is not traveling anymore, etc. That was kind of all over the place and was causing a little bit of delays and sometimes getting money to people, etc. So compliance really helped us with developing that workflow, and having compliance on it has made sure that we're following guidelines on break periods and who should be or shouldn't be receiving funds during those times as well. So that workflow now starts with the coaches, and it puts that on them to make sure that they're requesting money for each person that it needs the per diem. So that one has been a very useful and more efficient use of everybody's time to be able to get that money to people as they need it. And then official visit request forms that come to our office, as making sure our travel team knows who they can and can't make sure they have arrangements for. That's very, easy for them to see, and keeps us in the loop of what the business office needs to know as quickly as those things move. We all know that official visits happen within 24 hours, and we need to know what we're doing, et cetera. And the workflow keeps that stuff all in one place for our travel team to know exactly who and what they're doing there. So those are a few examples. And then the outside of the workflows, Harley's team does a great job of updating us on any, he mentioned earlier, rule changes coming down the pipe that we need to know, but also things like, hey, these are the coaches that are allowable to be out on the road recruiting right now. And then, it may change in a couple days, but these are the ones that are allowable right now as we go through any staff changes during the year. My office is responsible for alerting compliance anytime there's a hire or a separation, and then their office keeps us in the loop on any changes in positioning during the year.
Heidi and Dan, anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I think they hit on a lot of the same stuff we're doing here with the workflows. I think we use Teamworks CNR as well. I think years ago, everyone kind of saw those platforms solely as like, oh, that's a compliance platform. And it's now expanding out into other areas, whether it's per diem or, student assistance fund or anything like that. One of the things when you talk about communication and we work through our processes here is it, does the individual need an approval step in the form, or do they just need to know about it? Do they just need that email that says, hey, this happened? Maybe it was a change of status or something like that, or resources have changed, things of that nature, where they don't need to sign off, but it's good information to have. The other thing we do here when we look at a recruiting front from an expense report is expense reports are routed back through the compliance office for us to confirm that this is a permissible recruiter. We do have the recruiting documentation on file of where they were, contacts, evals, all that sort of stuff before we move forward in those expense reports. So it kind of, again, puts a checks and balances in place between the two offices on, what our coaches are doing and how they're spending things.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add. Everybody's kind of, hitting everything, but I would say, I think this is something we're constantly working on to improve as well, as just adding processes. I mean, everything from the ABO standpoint and kind of just how I operate, at least, is everything comes down to a process. So just making that all, effective and making sure all the right people are involved in that. I've had previous experience at other institutions where we're very arms heavy on processes. So, coming here and trying to see, can we bring any of those? Are there new things that are changing where we can add some more processes? So I think this is one area where, here at Louisville, we're still very much trying to improve things as much as possible through these, different technologies that we have.
I want to stick with Dan and Heidi, and then we'll come back to Haley and Harley. And it's actually something, Haley, you referenced briefly as you were talking about workflows and such, and that's staff turnover. And is we obviously are seeing more, I'll say, mid to senior level type staff members coming in from the professional sports ranks who have no college athletics background whatsoever, and just kind of either lessons learned or maybe just an anecdote to share that might be a helpful perspective on how you get folks who come with a whole different notion of how things might operate around sports and team functions as it relates to your particular units in the business office and compliance. Just anything you can share there, including any best practices.
Yeah, I can start here. So I think from a compliance standpoint for us, and we've had a number of individuals, whether it's coaches or mid-level administrators that come in from the private world for me, it's communication and getting in touch with them as soon as they start. I want to sit down with them, depending upon what their role is, and make sure they understand things are a little different in higher education in the college sports world, whether that's the NCAA rules or just the processes you need to follow in conjunction with campus. And having that initial conversation with them to kind of gauge what their level of knowledge is of the situation. You have some people that come in that maybe have followed college sports, so they have an understanding, or some that haven't worked in it for 10 years. But having that conversation with them, getting them that initial kind of education or let's just say onboarding of, hey, here's what you need to know in the first 10 to 15 days to get you going. As you get going in things, please ask questions. Let's meet again. Let's find out where you're having struggles or issues on. Really just providing them with the resources and making sure that they know it's an open kind of communication for anything that they may need.
Yeah, and I think, when we're even looking at new people coming in, kind of like Dan's saying, of course, we'd like to have them have that sports background, but we're really looking at, what skill sets do they have that can bring in, make them an asset in our department where, if you're looking at the ABO, that maybe they have really good accounting or finance background, those strong skill sets. I think one thing here in our ABO specifically, we have a hybrid structure. So most people have budget oversight, but they're also have certain functions. So they might overlook a lot of our travel, but they also have budget oversight of certain sports or support units. I hope that kind of helps get them ingrained not only in like the hard skill things that they're working on, but also the industry as a whole, the conference things they need to know, learning the campus as they need to know it. So it's really catching them up in those first few days, and then just making sure they know everything small scale to large scale.
Haley or Harley, anything to add?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Here when I first joined the staff at Memphis, there was a orientation process with the athletic department. In addition to the normal orientation you would do with the university, which I thought was helpful, and it would help the individuals that are like new to athletics in general to gather some of these concepts of what our operations are. And then as part of that, I noticed that there wasn't necessarily a spot for those individuals to meet with compliance. And I worked with our staff and or even our business office now, and we've implemented a item on their new hire checklist where they are to reach out and connect with compliance and have a time to sit down with us and go over some do's and don'ts and the applicability of legislation to their position, which is something that we just added to the checklist for them when they join our staff, which can help when you have some of the individuals coming in that don't necessarily have a strong athletics background and are joining the intercollegiate athletics for maybe the first time, or they're new to the career.
Yeah, and I'll only add to that as Harley said, we do have a new hire checklist that we've developed fairly recently here, and that also includes a business office meeting with any new employee, which the crux of that is really kind of a do's and don'ts, and this is how you purchase things, and this is what you don't do on your card, etc. It's a pretty baseline meeting, but the idea is for them to know who we are in the business office as well. And then from there, we, the different positions in my office can reach out and they do say, if you need anything related to these HR functions, please work through this person. If you need anything related to travel, please work through this person. And that way we can kind of introduce them to the people they need to know across our campus and our athletic department, that then they can know that's who to go to when questions arise in those areas. Because yes, somebody coming from the outside, especially if you haven't been in higher education recently, there's maybe an adjustment period to figure out the hierarchy of who you go to and where you go, and does this person report through this person. And so I think some of that is our goals are to just get them the right contact to start with, and then they can say, okay, this is who I advise that you go through and stay within the athletic department, or refer them to somebody on our campus partners if needed, that can teach them or guide them in some more detailed instruction on the area they're asking. So our office tries to be a centralized hub to say, come to somebody here and we'll make sure you get the answer, even if it's not through us.
Good stuff. Good stuff there. Hey, Haley, starting on something you also raised, so I appreciate the segue here, is establishing or maybe enriching key relationships with units across campus outside of athletics, right? And I kind of just throw this maybe popcorn style. Any of you can jump in on this, but any particular strategies and sort of best practices for saying, hey, we need to get this particular group more involved. Maybe they were kind of tangentially involved with athletics over the years, but we need them more involved now. How do we go about building a relationship that maybe just wasn't as sort of existent and sort of established as it could have been? So for any of you, that you can, and feel free to provide contextual examples, but any best practices on how to kind of get someone in an office more involved that's across campus that maybe has preconceived notions of how athletics is run or what have you, that you're going to need them involved with the conversation and operations.
I could start. I think that I had a unique situation coming into Memphis. I've been here a year and 3-ish months, almost 4 months, I guess. And the campus CFO that for the university started just about 10 days before I did. So we were both new at the same time. And that provided, I think, a good platform for me to build that relationship, and both of us being from the ground up and asking a lot of questions, and me saying, how do you want this relationship to look? What are you expecting of athletics? And it turned into, even within the first month, having one meeting with him to where I meet with him one-on-one every other week. And that really started our relationship on a good place that has helped me grow relationships with lots of units across campus, starting with our campus CFO, who also functions as our COO of campus. So he oversees a lot of areas and has been able to put me in front of people that, you know, I don't know if I would have had as quickly of a relationship with without his kind of forcing that for me. And that's been great. It's, you know, we've got good relationships with our financial accounting and financial planning offices that I meet with those people fairly regularly as well. And that just keeps them in the loop of what athletics is doing and not feeling like we're as much on an island as I think they may have felt under different circumstances. And so I think that really has, you know, trying to start there with those groups. But then, and maybe I'm kind of teeing this up for Harley, but you know, we also kind of rely on his office to help kind of build the relationships with financial aid, for example. And there was a recent situation where I had some questions on how we were going to get a specific payment made for some of our athletes that we needed, and I didn't know if it was something that, you know, financial aid was able to help with, and being able to rely on Harley's office for their relationships there, because my team doesn't have the same relationships with financial aid. But they made that connection, and I even had lunch with one of our financial aid directors that, through an introduction with them, that was able to, you know, help answer some questions that we had on moving forward on a few changes we may make. So his office really helped build that bridge between the business office and financial aid that we didn't really have before.
The lunches always help building goodwill.
Yes.
Any others just on that as it relates to connecting? Yeah, Dan, please.
Kind of add in there, kind of, for me, it's kind of meet them where they are. So, you know, don't be afraid to get out of your office, go meet them over in their space, and really ask them, kind of, you know, get to know them and ask them what their understandings are of athletics. I think sometimes, you know, we in athletics take advantage of the fast pace and the knowledge we have of things. When you're going to someone that doesn't live in the athletics world all the time, they just don't understand. They may be quick to say no because they don't understand why we're asking for X, Y, and Z. So taking the time to explain it to them of, you know, here's what the end goal is, and here's how we need some assistance and where we, you know, think you can play into it, and making sure that they have an understanding of what the overall picture is. You know, it was mentioned before, you know, meet them for lunch. I think it's also helpful, invite them to practice. You know, some of these campus partners, you know, may have attended the school, may be interested in athletics, and, you know, for them, getting to see a practice or something like that, even if it's just once, can go a long way to developing that relationship. So when you do have issues, you need to call and see, can you figure out a payment or admissions or, you know, legal or whatever it is, that you've developed that foundation with them, outside of just asking for things or asking for their help.
So I want to, and this is for all of our panelists, but something that I think is also a commonality for Louisville and Memphis in recent years is leadership changes at the highest levels of the university, whether it's athletic director, university president, et cetera, and want to just get perspectives that you can share with the audience on how you prepare for that change, how you help lead up for their offices, and not necessarily those individuals, but as, for example, presidents have chiefs of staff and other kind of senior level people that may be connecting with athletics. So any particular sort of lessons learned, again, we go back to best practices, but just examples that you would say, gosh, if I was in this position again, this was really helpful or this would have been helpful.
And I can
Yeah.
jump in here because I think it's probably enough to say we've recently just had a president change at the presidential level that was maybe a little unexpected. But I think in that sense, it's just in your role being prepared for how you can help those people. For us, it's our athletic director, on that change. What information does he have so he can start to brief the new president, or whether it's a board member or something like that, of being prepared to support those that are going to be in those positions, whether that's just being available for a call or giving them the information that they may need, because some of this stuff can happen, as Matt mentioned, pretty quickly. Some of it, the writing's on the wall for a while that there's going to be a retirement or something. You've got some time, but being able to adapt and support that change and be supportive of whatever the change may be for the betterment of really the university, I found it to be very important.
Yeah, I
Haley.
can speak a little. Yeah, we had an athletic director change, speaking on that level, since I've been here. And I'll say one thing, just as something that I tried to do is I reached out to a couple of mentors in the industry, people that were in my similar position that had been through an athletic director change recently, and an athletic director friends that, what would you want to see from your business office when you're coming into this role as a new athletic director, and tried to put together as much information, from the feedback I got from people, that to be ready to provide our new athletic director with whatever he may have wanted to hit the ground running with. And from there, trying not to overload with information, but have it readily available, to say, okay, these are the things that you want to focus on. And in week 1 and 2, here's the information I can provide on that. Here are the people that, I know that could help across campus. Here are the people that you could go to in the community through our development team, et cetera, to make relationships with right off the bat. So just trying to be as much information, a wealth of information that we could provide right off the bat, in a structured way that didn't overwhelm, but also was there when they were looking for it. And hopefully with that, just being able to build trust, because we were able to answer the questions that came as, the rapid fire in the first month, and that through that, just building a trust level where from there, able to get to know the types of information they would be looking for, and what to send through our deputy ADs, what to send directly to the athletic director, how he wanted to receive information. So I think trying to come in quick with the building trust helped, to then be able to decipher exactly how to communicate up the chain the best way.
Yeah, and good sense of how quickly things unfold when you have new leadership. Suddenly you have to drop other things and move other new things up the priority list. I do want to start and keep encouraging the audience. If you have questions, we're starting to get some in the chat, so I'm going to start sprinkling those in for our panelists. In particular, going back to processes, and I think this is a really good question from sort of trying to find the right middle lane or right spot. But here's the question in particular. The panel had mentioned processes before. We talked about workflows, et cetera. And I like how they phrase this. How do you find that Goldilocks level in your processes where it touches all the necessary departments without being too labor intensive? So any lessons learned there, strategies to go, and there've been kind of some references to some of the specific workflows that each of your offices do. So any thoughts or strategies around hitting all the spots, but not being too cumbersome? Heidi, we'll go Heidi and then Harley.
Yeah, I think, going back to us talking about kind of building some of those recently, I think first of all, just stripping it down and being like, what's the purpose of this process? And then from there, just, deciding, do people need this if it's like informational, or do they need to actually approve or make a decision on this in the process? I think one of the processes we were going through is just our purchase order processes. And I think it's easy just to be like, oh, let's put the sport admin on there as an approval. But then we're like, do they need to be an approval in that? Or is it just like very default to think that the sport admin has to be involved in this? And it's really, you know, going to those areas and being like, do you think you need to be part of this for information purposes? Or is there something that we're missing where you actually do need to approve it? You know, sometimes you might not know what you don't know in some of those areas too. So I think just communicating from the start and making sure that you're getting all the right, you know, approvals and steps in there, but also, you know, not trying to just, you know, throw people in there just because you think they might want to know. Then it can be too much for them, and then you know, it's ineffective. So we really try and from the bottom up look at it from the start, but then also if we're improving our processes, strip it down, look at how we can improve it, and make sure to communicate with those areas without assuming too much.
Very good. Thanks, Heidi. Harley?
Yeah, I mean, we're always happy to build a new workflow and look for ways of improvement and things like that. But I agree when you're doing that, you need to look at who actually needs to be involved versus who needs to be notified. You know, we don't want to have people on the workflows or in the process that just needs to have the information. Could bog it down if they become an approval role. Also, who is the person doing the approval role? You know, who is actually involved in the process? When we build it out, you don't want the department head to be the approval if they're not the one and that's actually in the weeds that's going to be doing the approval. You know, they are notification in the process, so they're aware they're not doing the approval. You know, send it to the, you know, not the associate D or the deputy or whoever's in charge of the department, but who's the director or the assistant director who's involved in the process that's going to be actually reviewing it and doing the work. They should be in the workflow as opposed to the department head, because they're going to go back to the person who is on their staff that's involved to get the answer and decide if that needs to be an approval or not. So I think just making sure the right people are involved and it flows through the correct positions on the notifications versus the approval, it makes those more effective.
Good stuff. Thanks, Harley. Got a couple more questions coming in. I know folks have referenced, obviously, Teamwork's a popular platform being used. Can any of the panelists speak more to, this is the question, to Teamwork's, the workflows and benefits for business and compliance? Anything, and I know some have been shared already, but anything else that comes to mind as it relates to that platform's benefit? Haley?
I think this short answer for us, it just keeps everything in one place, and it is easy to send the workflow from one area to the other without having to, you know, send an email, hope somebody saw your email, you know, digitally sign or etc. It just keeps everything in one place, and you know exactly who it's with on the workflow. So short and sweet answer that it's easy to track and easy to find, but I'll let somebody else expand.
Dan?
I was honestly going to say the same thing. I mean, it's, if you have a workflow, it's easy to just point to, yep, go in Teamworks, fill out the workflow. It's going to get routed to the right people. So you're not, oh, you should talk to this person, you should talk to that person. It's a short, sweet answer, and it gets the process rolling. And then once it's in place, you can easily go and look and see where it's at, who's reviewing it, and things of that nature to help nudge along if needed.
Here's
A
a
little
great,
more broadly, sorry, I'll add one more thing. A little more broadly is also that we've incorporated several of Teamworks products to, you know, to our portfolio, and some that makes it just a little easier to use CNR and the other products together when people are used to it and using it in their individual areas. So it's also just made people a little more familiar with the product itself, with some of the other areas that we use Teamworks for as well.
good stuff. So here's a topic we haven't touched on just yet, and it's a question from the audience that connects to all of your offices. But how do you approach team entertainment in terms of which policy or policies does that live under? Who's the point of contact on it? Is that a shared sort of process and decision making through for all of you? So any of you can jump in on that. Team entertainment for compliance and business office. Harley, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I'll start. I mean, on that perspective, since team entertainment has kind of opened up pretty broadly to be permissive, we just default to the budgets really. And I think the sport administrators as well. So if a coach comes in with a request and is asking about permissibility, or can they do something or not, The first question really kind of goes to, do you have in your budget and does your sport administrator looped in? If those are both yes, and the sport administrator is okay with the entertainment, then usually it's going to be okay through the business office and for the purchase side. So we really just look at those two areas when the request comes in for entertainment is in your budget, and does your sport administrator approve?
And just to reiterate to our audience, the Q&A is open. We're kind of sprinkling those in. So if you have questions, feel free to submit those. And actually for our group, you are getting some interested customers here as it relates to the new hire checklist and maybe some of the other, we'll say onboarding processes and forms that you may use for the whole group. Not putting anyone on the spot from Memphis or Louisville, but we do have interest from attendees. If you want people to reach out to you directly or somehow we'll find a way to share those documents if those schools are willing to do so. Another thing I wanted to kind of bring back is not to lose the opportunity to ask you about your own professional development in this very rapidly changing environment and also even learning new skill sets, whether that's in real time because you're asked to find a solution to this new issue, whatever that is. But can any of you share maybe something that fits under the sort of a professional growth development, especially there is more pressure preaching to the choir here, the athletic departments may be cutting in certain areas, including professional development. So when that is not necessarily a resource to maybe attend an extra conference or convention, how do you find ways to sort of develop and advance your skill set while you're doing your role? So anything there that people can speak to or strategies and how they get the supervisors, management to support those pursuits. Dan.
Yeah, so I think everyone thinks of attending NAAC and things like that, but other things unique here at Louisville, we have a program, it's called the Leadership Development Institute. It's a year-long program that individuals can apply to develop their personal and professional goals with guest speakers and interaction with individuals across, the department. Whether you're in compliance, you might be working with someone with marketing or the business office or possibly a coaching staff member, which I think provides a lot of value to individuals to have the opportunity to grow and develop internally without having to look elsewhere, which may come with expenses. The other thing is the university here offers a number of professional development opportunities on campus that are a lot of, whether it's webinars or different seminars you can sign up for that are, again, an easy way that you can kind of work into your day. It might be an hour on a Wednesday afternoon or something like that. But I think it's really taking advantage of what your campus may offer. There's a lot of things that people forget that are offered through HR or whatever your respective department may be on your campus, of ways that you can fine tune those skills for personal growth. It doesn't all have to be athletically related. There are a lot of other good opportunities out there to fine tune those skills.
I'll add to that as well. We also have what I think is a really great internship program here. And now, while that's not us full-time staff, I think it does give a little bit of an opportunity for our full-time staff to not only, work with that next generation that's coming up, but also they might be getting to serve on panels for those interns or doing some of that quick interviews with them. So that's been a really cool thing here that I've seen, getting to develop them. And also if people here, they might not, have oversight of people getting to work with those interns and get to, really start to develop them. It really just starts this trickle effect of being a really good thing for our department.
I think one thing here that I've, without probably even realizing it, have seen a lot of professional development personally is just working within our sport administration group and hearing and learning from what other people are seeing in their sports that has, been able to prepare me if something similar were to happen in a sport that I oversee. And kind of the same thing with our senior staff group and, even from Harley's shop on updates of the news on the regulation this week, and updates on as we move through house, the things that they've been able to prepare the rest of our senior staff with, that really has helped me understand better, and then able for me to go do my own research and say, this is the area I want to understand better. I feel like we've done a good job with this group here of people being willing to ask questions, and it's made it where I'm not even realizing it, but have learned a lot about other areas, and especially on the sport administration side, learned a lot about how people have had conversations with their coaches that have been applicable to things that I needed to do with mine.
And to continue off of the sport administration area, we have a program that we're going to roll out very soon at Memphis, which is like a secondary sport administrator program, where individuals who are interested in growth and advancement and get beyond, just their department that they work in every day, and have aspirations to be at a higher level or even be a sport administrator themselves, where they can join the program and become a secondary sport admin for a program and learn the ins and outs of what goes into that, and work with that primary sport administrator to have some growth in their career beyond what they just do on a daily basis in their office and within the department, and eventually have enough skills to be able to know what to do if you are in the role as a sport administrator before the day comes that you're asked to be one.
Good training ground there, and really good examples from both athletic departments. That's really cool stuff, and some of the opportunities, including to be able to teach those folks who are coming. That's its own skill set, right? To help, whether it's internship classes or leadership groups. So really good examples across the board. We did have one other, I'll say, more technical, kind of going back to some of the functions and workflow type things, but in particular, there was a question from the audience. Any of you can jump in, related to how you utilize Teamworks for per diem reviews and approvals, and anything you can expand on that particular topic. Kaylee.
Yeah, Harley, do you want to start with the beginning of the workflow and I can add in, or do you want me to?
Yeah, I mean, our workflow is not super extensive for the per diem. Essentially, it involves a spreadsheet that's been formatted where the coach is, or staff member is, just inserting names and dates in per diem request for the specific days for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and who's going on the trip. And we just compare that to travel rosters, and whether or what they're being provided for the trip in advance, whether they have a dinner planned or a sit down meal or a snack here or there, and then put those together and determine what was going to be granted from a per diem perspective before the trip takes place.
Yeah, so from our end, that spreadsheet, as you mentioned, it's got all the names of the travel party, and what's the request is. It goes into the workflow, the compliance, just like he says, kind of reviews for accuracy and allowability, and then comes to our travel, the team within my office, and that spreadsheet's turned into an upload on our card program, that for the exact amounts that's been approved, and then our card program works the same as most of them out there right now, where we can take money on and off the card based on the number of days of the trip, or if it's a tournament where they win and need to add more, or at the end of the trip take it back, etc. So the coach is responsible for, or the director of operations, whoever is the assigned person from the program, to create fill out the spreadsheet, start the workflow, and then it runs through compliance and then the business office, and then the business office actually loads the cards and manages the posting with our campus financial accounting office on the back end.
Thorough review there. Very good. Last question, and this is for the full group. A little bit more sort of administrator to administrator. Any sort of piece of advice, whether it's related to career and some professional development that you found helpful, and or even just self-care. This is difficult times for college athletics. Doesn't matter who you are and what role you play, but just from kind of administrator to administrator, any sort of sage advice you'd want to share with the audience today. So any of you can hop in.
I can go here, Matt. I think kind of just for me, the biggest thing is making sure you take some time for yourself. These jobs can be stressful, whether you're in compliance or the business office. You just see how fast things are moving and you're going in a million different directions. If that's just taking some time after work, even if it's, for me, sometimes it's just leave my phone in the other room for 15 minutes just so I'm not checking email or anything like that. And then definitely here in the summer months coming up is, making sure you schedule some vacation time so you can kind of recharge those batteries. It's just a meeting earlier and our AD gave the exact same message of like, everyone's busy, everyone's got a million things going on. Make sure you take some time for yourself this summer so you're recharged and you're ready to go when we get back here, full swing in the fall in August.
I'll add to that. I think, this is easier said than done and something I have to work on all the time, but trying to prioritize the tasks in the order that they need to be done instead of, all the emails come at you at once and trying to do everything at the same time, trying to distill that down to what you need to be focused on right then, to not get overwhelmed by the sheer number of tasks at any one time. So I think trying to find a way that works for each individual person to identify the most important thing in front of you and work on one at a time to get through the list quicker instead of paralysis by being overwhelmed by the number of things going on.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all trying to find balance right now, trying to figure out how we're going to do this. I think the big thing I keep going back to is, and like we all try to say, but it's really hard sometimes to when we're not front facing in the business office, but the student athletes are who we're doing it for. So I try and be really intentional to make it to games, make it to events. I try really hard to go to at least one of every sport, try and not only just to go and show your support to the coaches so, they see you there, but also just to remember, who you're doing it for. I think all of us on this call are sport admins. I think that gives us a really cool lens to be able to interact with the student athletes a little bit more. And that's been really fun for me to be able to interact with them and kind of remember, this is why we started it. This is why we're doing what we're doing. So I just think that's huge, just to try and keep making it to the sports, to their events. So.
Harley, any final thoughts before we wrap?
I mean, I would just echo everything that they said. Of course, it's always communicated to us to make sure you take some time to yourself, but we multitask and prioritize every day, and just make sure in the summer and you get a chance to do that for yourself and have some free time, have some hobbies, recharge, and be ready to go for the year, because it's just pedal to the metal every day for us.
Good stuff. Good final thoughts. And I really want to thank Harley, Dan, Heidi, and Haley for covering so much ground in less than 60 minutes. We really touched on everything from technical to tactical to just relationship building and so forth. So thank you to the panel for a great hour. And I'm going to kick it back to Kyle to kind of finish the session.
Thanks, Matt, and what a great session today. Really appreciate everyone on the panel and their insights and perspectives. Like we said, this was one that we had been looking forward to on our calendar all year long. And I also want to end with just some gratitude and thanks to everyone who helped make this happen. So Grace List, who's on here, Michael Saint, Christy Bannon from NAAC, Ashley Lico from CABMA. Just a great group, and this was a thought just in the back of our minds 6 months ago, 3 months ago, and to see this come to life is really cool. So as we mentioned, this was recorded. We will share this recording out to both memberships for those that were unable to attend today. So thank you to Matt for moderating today. Thank you to the panel, and just a reminder for all those that are planning to attend NACDA, CABMA, NAAC, the early bird rate does end May 1st. So make sure if you have not signed up for your convention registration, please do so to take advantage of that. That's all for us here today. So on behalf of CABMA, NAAC, the panel, and Matt, thank you, and hope everyone's doing well, and have a great rest of your week.